Egypt. One of the causes of this popular turmoil was the terrible economic situation, as well as the increasing isolation of Morsi from the mainstream of Egyptian politics. So there are people listening, and I think they will be responsible. Ultimately, though, this will be the Egyptians' task to create a government that is stable, productive, and protects the people of Egypt.
Senator Corker, do you believe that the president has been handling this appropriately? He's come out, he said he's not taking sides here. He has issued some warnings and admonitions to the Egyptian government, but at the same time, he cannot be sad that Morsi is gone. Do you think he's handling it correctly?
You know, like I'm in a country right now where, what we wish to happen and what happens isn't always the same. I just came from Pakistan, where numbers of issues exist there, and things that we would like to occur don't always occur. So I think sometimes people think that just because we are, in fact, the greatest nation on earth today, that because we want something to happen, it will. I think that, again, urging calm, we need to remember that the reason we conduct foreign policy, the reason people like me are here and Jack and others do the same thing, is we're trying to project our nation's national interest. And what we need to look at here is what is in our national interest. And calm in that area. Obviously, Egypt breaking apart is not good for the allies that we have. We do have some treaties that are in place that are very important. We need to keep that in mind. So again, I don't know what else our nation can do at this time other than to urge the military to move along in a responsible way, to urge all parties to recognize that they've been part of this process. It's broken down. We can assess what's happened down the road and who caused all of this to occur, but at present, as a nation, these people who've run for office, these parties who've been created to move this country ahead, need to realize that right now, breaking that apart is not in their interest. Certainly it's not in our interest. And again, at present, I'm not sure what else the United States can do other than trying to be a calming voice and doing the same with the rest of the neighborhood.
Senator Reid, one thing that is talked about that the U.S. could do is cut off aid to Egypt's military. The president has stopped short of calling this a military coup. American law would require that if the State Department did declare this a military coup, that aid be cut off. And certainly Senator McCain and Senator Leahy have said they think that we should cut off aid. In fact, let's play what Senator McCain said on Friday.
We have to suspend aid to the Egyptian military because the Egyptian military has overturned the vote of the people of Egypt.
Senator Reid, Senator McCain, quite clearly there by inference, said this was a military coup. Do you agree?
Well, this is a very unusual situation, if not unique. You have military forces acting to essentially carry out widespread popular views in the country against a regime that was becoming increasingly authoritarian.
But at the same time, a regime that was democratically elected.
Indeed, it was democratically elected, but what was happening, and I think this was best manifested by the people of Egypt, is they were growingly concerned about the direction of this government. And I think on a practical basis, we have to look and ask a very simple question. Will cutting off aid accelerate or enhance the opportunities and the chances to have a truly democratic government? I don't think so. I think also there are other strategic issues at play. One is the transit of the Suez Canal, a stable relationship between Egypt and the State of Israel, also ongoing counterterrorism activities. I think we have to be very, very careful in terms of suspending aid or cutting it off. I think what we have to do is insist that the military have a very rapid, very clear timeline, pathway to democratic elections, that there is full participation in these elections, and that we also engender much more economic support, not from the United States, but from the international community, to assist the emerging and hopefully very quickly emerging democratic government in Cairo.
I want to move on to another topic of health care in just a second, but Senator Corker, I want to ask you one more question. A lot of conservatives warned the president back in 2011 against the rush to throw Hosni Mubarak overboard, that the transition to elections should have been slower, should have allowed opposition parties to gather more strength. Do you think it was a mistake to rush to throw Mubarak overboard 2 years ago?
I do think that our nation sometimes thinks that going to the ballot box is democracy, and I do think that there is a rush from time to time to try to move countries in that direction too quickly. I don't think Egypt is mature yet in that regard, and I think we need this right now is an excellent opportunity, another chance for us to work with them in that regard. But let me go back to the aid issue, if I could, briefly. Part of the aid that we supply is in support of the treaties, and again, we need to look at our national interest. There'll be plenty of time to assess the aid issue. You know, it seems like Washington always wants to jump to something that really, in many cases, at this moment, does not matter. The aid doesn't flow on a daily basis. We'll have plenty of time to assess that, and it seems to me that what we should be looking at is how the military and how the country itself handles this transition. We need to encourage that. I think trying to jump to what we're going to do relative to support at this moment is not the place that we need to be.
All right, let me...
Problems, corruption, and doesn't have a history of civil liberties, and which, by the way, the Army reflects that behavior as well.
I'll give folks a little glimpse behind the curtain. Every Saturday we have a call with the panelists. We talk about these topics, and Dennis Kucinich, you had an interesting theory about what might have happened here based on the prevalence of Egyptian military in the building right behind me on Capitol Hill.
Through 16 years in Congress, the only military which consistently visited my office, and I would say I didn't have a special privilege, or all over Capitol Hill, the Egyptian military. Now, why do they do that? Because the Egyptian military gets more than 70% of the U.S., of its budget comes from U.S. taxpayers. So we have an enormous influence on what the Egyptian military does. And to pretend that the White House is staying aloof from this doesn't pass the straight face test, frankly. So we have to understand that we are playing a role here, that there was a military coup, that the military is getting backed financially by the U.S. And unless, as Senator John McCain said, that we pull that aid, we will have been instrumental in helping not just this coup, but as Nina implies, perhaps the next one. We cannot tell Islamists that we want them to pursue democratic traditions if, in fact, when a democratically elected government who happens to believe in Islam is suddenly dislodged in a coup by a military which is strongly backed by the United States.
So, Juan, should we pull our aid from Egypt's military?
No, I think that would be self-defeating. Obviously, we want to exercise the leverage we have there. The reason that we give the Egyptians so much military aid is, in fact, because it's in our national interest. It's in our national interest in terms of looking at that region, looking at Israel, trying to hold off what's taking place in Syria, what's taking place in Iraq. Absolutely, it's the case that Egypt is an important ally to the United States. That's why we need it to be stable. But let's not, have any illusions here. While Britt may think that el-Baradei is no friend to the United States, the Islamists in Egypt see him as a secularist, a guy who spent most of his time in the West, in New York and London, and they fear him. That's why yesterday they said they'd pull out of any coalition if el-Baradei was part of it. So from our perspective, the U.S. perspective, el-Baradei is better than having some of these Islamists take power again. I think, the problem for the Islamists is they haven't demonstrated the capacity to govern. And I think that's what the Egyptian people say.
But neither have any of these opposition parties either, because they're so horribly organized they couldn't get it together.
Well, the only institution that has the ability to govern there is the Army, which is hugely popular. And that's the institution that's been in power, and that's the institution that the public has turned to guide a democracy, which is probably not the direction you want to go if you really want a democracy. And if you're not going to use military aid as leverage to move a country towards a democracy, an inclusive democracy, what do you get? You're just not going to have any leverage? You're not going to use your leverage?
That's what I'm saying. I think we have to use our leverage, and that's why I say I don't have the kind of inhibitions that I'm hearing from some of you about saying to the military, here is what's in the U.S. interest. We, as Congressman Kucinich said, we put money in there, and we put it in for a very real reason, which is that we want influence. It's time to exercise it. We've got a new team in place at the White House with Rice, Hagel, and Kerry, And they are trying right now. They tried to get Morsi to make a deal to be more compromising. He refused. Don't mistake it. He's not a good guy.
Okay. Whether you should make the decision to cut off aid now or to keep it going is really two sides of the same coin. It is a way of exercising the influence that the aid provides. Something we apparently have failed to do during Morsi's reign, and believe me, Morsi and his government and military were just as dependent on the aid as any current or future government will be. So, and remember that a lot of that aid has to do with the treaty, particularly the treaty with Israel, which was a milestone, and very critical in the Middle East, and has definitely helped. So if we're going to cut off aid, we've got to be careful about how we do it, which aid we cut off, and so on. But it seems to me that it's the right call to try to use the leverage one way or the other to try to bring about to get the country actually on a path to democracy.
Let me jump in here because let's leave, obviously, further discussion on this. Let's leave that for Panel Plus coming up after the show.